And you're good.
Hi everybody, I'm Michael from the Sewing Place, and I thought today I would do a little live video showing you how to take care of sewing machines somewhat. Now keep in mind, what I'm showing you doesn't make you a sewing machine mechanic, but it does hopefully extend the life of your sewing machine by allowing you to feel more comfortable in the home maintenance that you'll be doing. For those of you that don't know me, I have been working in this field since I was 14. I turned 45 this weekend, so over 30 years of working in the sewing machine repair end of the industry, as well as, of course, sewing and selling and the whole 9 yards. So I began when I was 14 with my father going to home ec departments. This is back when home ec was still a big deal, and we had a lot more classrooms in the country working. So all summer long I kind of learned the trade, and I've been doing it ever since. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about some of the basic things you need to look at to maintain your sewing machines. We'll look at some old machines, we'll look at a couple new machines, and we'll talk about some of the things that you should have to maintain your machines well. So first off, we want our machines to be kept clean. Why do our machines get dirty? Well, if you think about sewing or quilting or whatever, each time that needle pokes into that fabric, it's just dropping a couple pieces of lint. Now if you have an embroidery machine, an embroidery could have 100,000 stitches. Each one of those stitches dropping a couple pieces of lint, all of a sudden you have couple 100,000 pieces of lint in your sewing machine. So it's really easy to see how that can accumulate and potentially cause problems. Lint itself isn't such a big deal, but what's going to happen is this lint will begin to pack around the gears and the bearings and all the moving parts, and it will keep your machine from moving properly. That obviously will wear out your machine much sooner than it should wear out. It is recommended, if you're doing a lot of sewing, that you take it to a repair person fairly regularly. I would recommend probably once a year if you're doing a lot of sewing. If you're not quite doing a lot, you may do it every couple years. You'll have to have a good relationship with your sewing machine technician to understand what's most appropriate for the sewing that you do. And obviously the machine matters as well with that, and how serviceable it is for you at home. So we want to keep the machines clean. We also want to inspect our sewing machines for damage. If your machine is damaged in any way, you can have a myriad of problems. One of the most noticeable is that your threads could break, or we could have bad stitches. So we want to become familiar with how everything looks on our sewing machines, and we also want to notice whether we have any damage. If you do find damage on a machine, replace the part. You know, spending that $20, $30, $40, $50, whatever it costs for this one particular piece could save you hours of frustration, and you know, obviously we want the best result. So definitely you want to replace things that are worn. Don't try to save a couple bucks on stuff like that. One specific example of places that wear are what we call the needle plates. These are typically this area here on the sewing machine where the needle goes into the machine and collects the bobbin thread. What you'll find is in that area, many times people find that their machines aren't sewing well and they start pushing the fabric through. By doing that, they end up bending the needle into the metal plate, thereby breaking the needle and damaging that plate. And if you look extra close, you can see on this particular plate that there's tiny little chips in that plate. Sometimes we can take a little sandpaper and smooth those off. Other times you should simply replace that so that you have the best possible machinery at that point. So we want to notice any problem areas. We want to also change the needles fairly frequently. That's something that most folks don't take the time to do. Needle is such an inexpensive item. A standard needle is 50 or 60 cents, so it's worth that 50 or 60 cents to have good results. You also want to use a nice quality thread. That standard thread being consistent in thickness is going to give you a better result. If your thread gets thick and thin, your result is going to be a stitch that looks good and bad because of the discrepancies in the spool. So a good thread quality is always desired. Now before we begin looking at the various parts that we're going to try to keep clean, we're going to look at some of the tools you may want to have handy to help you quote-unquote service your machine. You may need a screwdriver depending on your machine, flathead or whatever, to loosen screws. So a flathead screwdriver. You may want a pair of tweezers or some forceps to grab large chunks of debris. A dental pick is also a nice tool to have, as it allows you to scrape in areas that your hands cannot get into. A small screwdriver, flathead probably, for adjusting any tensions if you need to. A flashlight obviously is nice to have to look. A piece of sandpaper to clean up any problem areas. A brush. Scissors to check to cut threads or whatever, to cut fabric. Some fabric to sew on when you're done, some thread for the top, and a contrasting thread for the bottom. Another little item you might want is a vacuum kit so that you can clean those out. Those are available here. I don't have it upstairs with me. So the vacuum kit, obviously to suck the debris out. We don't really want to blow it out so much anymore on the modern machines because they're more enclosed. So you want to be able to pick the debris out and clean it accordingly. One other little thing I have here, this is, we have items called Toa Gauges today. They're a specific gauge to measure thread tension. This is just a little standard letter weight gauge. And that can actually allow me to measure how hard my bobbin pulls. So if we look here, I could literally attach this to a thread and pull and check the measurement against my scale on my gauge. We also carry a more precise item called a Toa Gauge. They're about $69, something like that, last I checked. And what they can do again is give you a measurement of how hard this thread pulls. You want to get those baseline numbers if you can, simply to have a comparison for future problems you may have. So if your stitch all of a sudden seems out of whack, you could pull out your gauge, check the number. If it doesn't match with what was written down before, then obviously there could be a problem with whether there's something stuck in the tensions or there's a tension simply out of whack. If you are uncomfortable taking your machine apart, just stop the video right now. If you don't feel mechanical, just stop the video. You want to have a little bit of comfort. Do not go further than you're ever comfortable with. I have to think back when I was in middle school and I had to take shop class, and the shop teacher had this demonstration of lamps wired up on a wall, and he said, "Mike, go over and take that lamp off, and I want you to wire this lamp up." So I took the one lamp off and I scratched my head and I said, "How am I putting this other lamp on?" So I took it over to the shop teacher and I said, "How do I wire this lamp up?" And he looked at me, little 7th grader I was, and said, "What are you, stupid? What kind of person takes something apart and doesn't pay attention to how they took it apart so that they can put it back together?" It was a hard lesson for a little kid. But at the same time, it's something that stuck with me from that day forward. Anytime I took something apart, if I didn't have it memorized in the sense of this went off first, so therefore it goes back on last, I was writing it down, the order in which I would take something apart. One of the brilliant things we have today are cell phones, and they're with us all the time. They say more pictures are taken in a single day than were taken in the last century altogether. So we have these cameras with us all the time. You can photograph specific items as you're taking them apart to help you feel more comfortable, and use that as a reference to put it back together. So we're going to look quickly now at removing needle plates and things like that. One thing you should notice here, I'm using this old machine as an example simply because some of the parts are a little easier to see the mechanism. Now, this machine, being as old as it is working on many of the same principles as a modern sewing machine. This one just looks way cooler. So what we have here is we have a tension area. Tension is basically squeezing your thread. It's two pieces of metal squeezing your thread. We have that on the top, and we have that in the bobbin. We'll look at the bobbin a little closer in a few minutes. When you lift the presser foot up on all machines, what happens is this becomes loose. And that way you can pull your fabric out, and the thread will very easily pull through the machine. So as you can see, when I thread this, it pulls fairly easily. Now it's gotten much, much tighter. It's very, very tight against that thread. The problem that we can have with a sewing machine is that this area can get lint, broken threads, or whatever. So it's important to keep the area that squeezes your thread clean. The easiest way I can tell you to do that is to tie a knot in a piece of thread, as such. And just like flossing your teeth in the morning, with the presser foot in the up position, remember when we put that up, this gets loose. With the presser foot in the up position, you can now run this knot of thread through the tension. And what that knot will do is it will catch your larger chunks of debris, and it will help keep that area clean. So that's a real easy way of cleaning that without taking it completely apart. Is it, 100% foolproof? No, but simply something that can make it a whole lot easier for you. I'm going to use this machine for something else now. If you have an older machine and this is accessible, the older machines have the belts that are visible. And if you notice that your belt is starting to wear and you want to replace it, please notice you have an adjustment on these machines that allows you to loosen and raise and lower the motor to make the belt tighter or looser. So that's how you would change your belt, and when you tighten it, you don't want it tight. You want it just enough that if you were to step on the pedal and hold the hand wheel, that this would just sort of hum. If the pulley starts spinning, it's too loose. But you don't want this very tight. These motors don't need a lot of tension on them with the belts. I'm going to take this machine and set it to the side for now. And now I'm going to bring up a machine that has a front load bobbin case. This one's really nice because we can see that it opens right up. I'm going to lift the foot up here again. This comes straight out. Now there are different types of bobbin cases in machines. We have front load, and we also have drop-in bobbin cases. An example of a drop-in bobbin case would be this Viking sewing machine. And as you can see, this drops in here. We'll look at that in just a moment, a little more closely. Now remember, just a few minutes ago, I said that we have two places that squeeze our thread. We have the top, and in this particular instance, it would be in this area here. And we also have the bobbin. So in this particular bobbin case here, the thread is pulling in between here. And so if you see, flat piece of metal squeezing my thread. This makes it tight, somewhat tight. Not nearly as tight as our top bobbin. What can happen as well with this, just as the top, is that underneath here, if you yank your thread out hard one day, you could break some thread and get it stuck in behind here. Now what can happen then is that your two pieces of metal, instead of being able to squeeze tightly on our threads, now have a bit of foreign matter in there, and they're held open. Because they're held open, there's nothing able to squeeze the threads, which then causes us to have a problem with our stitches. So it is advisable now and then to slightly, ever so slightly, bend back that little spring. Quick little blow like that, and you should maybe removed any kind of debris that would be holding that open. I can't tell you how many times that is the biggest problem with a sewing machine. Now I feel tension. You want to get your, if not measuring, like I said earlier, where we could measure the resistance, simply get your hands used to feeling the tightness on the thread after you thread the bobbin case. Every time I thread a machine, whether it be an old machine or a new machine, I thread something and I pull and I feel a change in how easily or how heavy this thread pulls through the machine. Very important on that. We also need lubricants on some machines. Actually, every machine needs lubrication. It's a fallacy to say that you don't have to oil machines, period. It is true that machines are designed and made today with center bearings and even ball bearings that allow you to use them without lubricating them on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. However, they are still pieces of machinery, and these areas should be lubricated at some point, even though they have sealed bearings. They're not going to last for 50 years without some kind of help. So when they're brought into a technician, it is assumed that you would be taking care of your machines, that they will be brought into a technician occasionally. So that annual maintenance, we're going in and we're rehydrating some of these bearings. Obviously, if they could make items oil-free completely, we would have cars, engines with no oil in. But that's not going to happen because friction is just not going to be taken care of quite that way. The center bearings are very good and the sealed bearings are very good, but again, I think every annually or even at least once every 3 or 4 years, a machine should be lubricated well by an experienced technician. So with that in mind, there are specific machines that allow you to lubricate, and they're telling you to lubricate. In this particular instance, I'm going to use some oil. You want to use a high-grade precision oil. We sell it here. It's about $3 a bottle. It's not very expensive. This bottle will last you a very long time. It's great because, we can pull that apart and get into hard-to-reach areas. So on this specific item, we look at the particular area here. I can see one area sit still and the other area moves. Now, the fact that I'm oiling it doesn't always mean, and you can see just a little tiny drop there on the faff. The fact that I'm oiling it doesn't always make me think about lubrication. Oil also acts as a fantastic cleaner. If you've ever tried to peel a sticker off of something and sprayed some orange cleaner on it or Goo Gone, basically there's sort of an oil type of cleaner. That oil permeates and gets rid of the stickiness. And so that's the same thing that can happen with your lubrication. It doesn't always deal with lubricating, but it cleans things for us. Another area we want to look at cleaning well, or taking care of, is the most overlooked area, and that is the feeding system of our machines. When I told you earlier that we tend to pull our fabric through the machine, it was because our machines are not feeding properly. And so most of the time they're not feeding properly because as all of this dust falls into the machine, it starts compacting into these areas here. And with every stitch it compacts that. And there are times that folks bring their machines in and they're not pulling the fabric at all because they're so compacted in this area that the teeth can no longer come up through the plate. At that point they're beginning to damage the mechanism, bending parts, and also damaging the needle plate because they're pulling their fabric through the machine. So if there's one area I can tell you to take care of, it is between your feed dogs. And this is all you do is scrape out in between these areas and ensure that they're clean enough so that as they rise through the plate, their path is not impeded by thick lint that has been compacted into there. Let's now look at a drop-in bobbin scenario. So here we have a drop-in machine. This pulls directly off, and we look inside at the same things. So the really only difference between this one and the previous model was this loads on top, whereas the other one loaded in the bottom. When I asked earlier for you to look at the needle plate for damage, that's because, yes, they get damaged. And again, I could take a little bit of sandpaper, which I think I have here, and fold it up and just gently try to remove some of that. Some of the other areas you want to look at as well include your bobbin case. Become accustomed to your bobbin case. Become accustomed to how you should remove it. If you don't know, look in the book. If you don't have a book, ask your local dealer. You all should have local dealers. You shouldn't buy sewing machines in places that you can't get service. I'm not trying to say you have to buy from a dealer, but I am. Honestly, you want to go to people you can trust that can work on it. It's it's the same idea as buying a car. It's a very complex piece of machinery, and you need people that can help you with these things. It is a very precise piece of machinery as well. However, if there's damage inside here, it's not going to function, and it can be probably one of the most frustrating pieces of machinery in somebody's life. So make sure to go to people that you trust to help you take care of this. So you do want to learn minimally how to remove the bobbin case, and you also of course want to learn how these should feel. So if you turn these in the light, you would be able to see if a needle has struck this, and if the needle has, you need to again gently smooth this off or replace it. Again, messing with something that's flawed, sometimes it's best just to put a brand new one in, chalk it up to a bad experience or whatever, but definitely you want that to be smooth or else the thread will catch, because as a sewing machine makes a stitch, the thread literally rubs over that entire surface area. And so as that thread rubs against there, if there's a catch, it will catch that, it will cut the thread, it will damage the bobbin case even further by grabbing it and turning it, and the power of the machine can literally damage this as well as other parts if it's not properly taken care of. I'm also looking right here at this machine. I just happened to notice this, and I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but if you look, I can see right here there's a tiny little, looks like a piece of glitter. That is an area that I think the needle has struck at some point, and I'm going to need to clean that up. So again, it's about noticing an area that maybe has been damaged by a needle. If that's the case for you, please bring it to your local dealer because they need to get in there with specific tools and keep the tolerances the same. So we want to keep the bobbin case clean, and as well as the last bobbin case that came out differently, we also have 2 pieces of metal that squeeze. These are just in a different area. I hope you can see that well. And again, you want to be very careful, but here it's very easy. Just push this back, give it a slight blow, and make sure the lint is out of that area. Drop your bobbin back in with the bobbin case out of the machine so that you can snap your thread into the threading path, and you should literally feel that the thread has gotten tighter. Now that we've done a little bit of cleaning, so you want to get in here and clean. Actually, I didn't talk about that with the brush, but get in here and just kind of clean that out. Suck out the lint that you find inside. Turn the hand wheel, look at different angles, and get in here with tweezers and grab your larger chunks. If you're not sure that you're grabbing something, or that you're in an area that you're not comfortable with, then just back away, gentle brush, and put it back together. Take it to your dealer again if you're not sure. We'll just put this together for now so that we can discuss sewing the machine in and checking our tensions. Honestly, I should have grabbed a different presser foot, but this will take me just 2 seconds to change. We want to simply use a zigzag type of presser foot, minimally. It's good to use the factory bobbin, so you always want to use the manufacturer's versions, not some cheap knockoff, at least for the sew-in. And again, I'm going to use a different color thread on top so that I can see my stitch difference between the top and the bottom tension. Many people will look at tension and decide that it's not quite exactly how they think it should be. I want you to understand what you want to look for now in a stitch. Obviously, a straight stitch is going to look a specific way, and everybody, I think, can agree on how that should look, so we're going to go straight stitch, do a little sewing here. And of course, this machine actually does need service. It's in here for service. And you should see pretty consistent stitching here. This one here, I've got little tiny loops on, so as a technician I'm going to adjust that and work on that in a couple different ways. But more importantly, you also want to sew a zigzag, and we want to see that the top stitch is coming slightly around to the bottom. This would be most ideal. I'm hoping that that comes through well in the camera. Again, this machine's got a little bit of an issue here where we're getting a little too much at times. But again, we want to see a little bit extra along the bottom, and that's quite all right. I also like people to sew a satin stitch. If they've got an electronic variation of that where the machine is selecting that, definitely check out what that's using. As I drop my thread. And on a satin stitch, we want to see this. We want to see our top thread really pulling around to the back. And the reason for that is we want our stitch to always be rounded and nice and smooth and lay flat on our fabric. The final thing you should check for is a multi-motion stitch. It would include something like a flat lock stitch like this. And so I'm literally going to make some changes here to this stitch. So as you can see here, the stitch should look like this. I've actually altered this so that now the stitch is out of alignment. If your stitch is out of alignment, these are issues that you want to look for to understand whether you should take it in for a service. These aren't big deals. Having a stitch out of alignment really isn't a big deal. This is sort of like the tread wearing on your car tires. It's going to happen. It's not a big deal. You just go in and you get that alignment fixed, and it's fairly minimal. It's generally something we do in with a standard service. Same thing with stitch quality being slightly out of whack, balancing the tensions. What I wanted to develop in your minds today, though, was the fact that you should learn to become accustomed to how things feel. You want to just scrape out specific areas. You want to make sure that that tension is working properly. The other thing is when you put your presser foot down, you should also feel that the top thread gets very tight. And quite honestly, it's okay that that thread is so tight that it's literally almost breaking the thread if I pull on it. It's very, very tight. Typically with sewing machines, you can find a top tension of somewhere between 70 to 100 grams depending on the manufacturer, and then the bottom tension is typically somewhere between 15 to 25 grams. Obviously that varies from person to person as well. Sometimes we set sewing machines to specific sewers' needs, and so that can change, and it doesn't really have to be set in stone that way. The important thing to know is that when we put that foot down, that thread gets tight. If it doesn't, then there's something that's keeping that thread from being squeezed, whether it's debris inside the machine or simply a failure in the machinery. I don't know if there's any questions coming up. Laurie is our person here that's filming for us today. So
there was one earlier when you had the singer up.
Okay.
When you adjusted the belt,
Okay.
someone asked if you could do that on new machines too.
New machines typically, in this particular instance, you know, I can't see the belt, so therefore we're not getting into removing covers and things like that. Obviously there's thousands of different machines and thousands of different ways that these machines can come apart. But yes, any machine that has a belt, and most of your, I guess all of your home machines have it, you get into long arms. Now they may not have a belt and maybe direct drive, and some of the old Singers had gear driven motors, so there was no belts. But typically, yes, this has a belt inside, and yes, as a technician I can adjust it. Problem is I can't teach you how to open this up because there's so many different machines, and it's not something we really want to encourage because there's a lot of delicate parts in there that we want to be careful of. If you open it up wrong and a spring flies out across the room, that could be a real problem. So yes, they have that ability. If you can see the belt on the new machine or reproduction machine or whatever, it is adjustable in the exact same way. Some of them have different options as well, of course. I think there were old Kenmores that had a spring-loaded motor that would automatically adjust for you, as well as this machine actually inside has a spring-loaded motor pulley or idler that will keep the correct belt tension for us. Any more questions come up?
Do feed dogs ever need replaced due to wear?
Absolutely. So feed dogs are typically something that I keep in stock for certain model machines. And, you know, you think about it. So here's a set of feed dogs, in fact, that I keep handy. And it's again, these are your tires on your sewing machine. Tires need replaced, and feed dogs definitely need replaced. These are sharp little teeth, and there's, you know, great alloys and metals to make these. However, you know, we live in a physical universe where things can wear down due to friction, and you have metal feed dogs gripping and pulling fabric all day long. Sometimes we're just, we forget to put fabric in, and it's just metal against metal. So yes, these can definitely wear out, and they should be replaced if you feel like they're not pulling well. Obviously, the other issue is if your feed dog's not able to come up through the plate because of debris. So it's real important to get rid of the extra debris that can build up in these little segmented areas on the feed dog. So you want to keep those clean. But if they're clean and your feed dogs seem like they're coming up, most definitely you want to get some new ones that are sharper, and they're going to grip and pull much better. Any others?
I believe that is it.
Well, this is all I'm going to give you for today, folks. And if you want this to happen some more, make sure to like us. Make sure to like this video. Make sure to add comments. Tell us what you think. And we'll do a lot more, hopefully in the near future. So thank you for your time. Hope you all have a great day. Again, I'm Michael from the Sew-In Place. You can find our website, www.sewnplace.com. So that's sewnplace.com. I'm working on getting these videos uploaded to our YouTube channel. I will put that out on our Facebook page once that's available. And we look forward to seeing you in the shop. Thanks. Goodbye.